is the second day of our workshop dedicated to biodiversity and ecosystem services. In this session, morning session, the item is social approach to biodiversity. We have 3 speakers this morning. We begin at once with Isabel Kent. And Isabel Kempf leads the UN-raised bond program on integrating knowledge and capacity development for the SDGs prior to, and then she was the co-director of the UNDP and UNEP Poverty Environment Initiative based at UNEP in Nairobi. She has 26 years of experience working with the UN. She will be talking today, social approach, and of biodiversity management. So I invite her to begin her session. Isabel.
اوكي شكرا. اوكي انا درست اللغه العربيه في الامم المتحده ولكن
I have studied in the UN Arabic, but the problem is that I cannot use it.
But you pronounce so good Arabic.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm very thrilled. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very thrilled to see such a dynamic group of journalists. And because you're journalists, I hope you love to ask a lot of questions. So I have a presentation which gives you some of the ideas, but then we also have an exercise in the middle of the presentation where I would like to please have a discussion with you on some of the hot issues. Yeah,
of course.
Julian, can you please share the presentation with us instead of me, because I don't know how to do it now. Okay, could you share my presentation with everyone, Julian? Yes, okay, perfect. Can you make it a bit bigger and then can you put it on full screen?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you.
I try to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically, I mean, I just wanted to start with a little bit that's a little bit our logo at the moment. You know, the climate is changing, why aren't we? So we have a lot of biodiversity loss, which is affecting our lives. You know, the recent COVID pandemic has shown that, you know, the loss of biodiversity can really have a big impact on the rest of humanity, but why aren't we changing? So I think that's a little bit the question of, you know, the social dimension of biodiversity and the loss of biodiversity. The question is, you know, as we know, we are very dependent on nature. Why don't we protect better? And, you know, how can we kind of change our behavior and institutions to make sure that we live in greater harmony with nature? Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so just to tell you a little bit about UNRIST before I start. UNRIST is really an independent think tank of the UN, which is looking at the social dimension of development. And we often provide some critical perspectives and pluralistic perspectives, often from the global south, because we work with a network of researchers from different parts of the world. And the idea is to provide alternative thinking and pluralistic perspectives on development. Thanks. Next, please. And there's a little video which explains a little bit how we do this. No, can you just click on the video, on the link? Yeah. You have to double click, I think, and then it should open. Can you double click, Julian?
Julia?
You know, you have to click on the link and then open it in YouTube. Just double click on it over the right.
Sorry, there is a problem. I don't know how to.
Just double click on the link, on the link here. Okay, Julian, if it doesn't work, don't worry, we can watch it later. We will just share the link with all participants afterwards. Just go back then to the presentation if it doesn't work for you. Yeah.
Sorry for this problem.
No, don't worry. Just go back to the presentation, please. And
Yes.
then we will share the link later so people can watch it. Yeah. Okay, she said, Paramita says, click on control and the link at the same time.
Is it okay?
Yeah, just let's leave the video. Let's go to the next slide. It's okay. Don't worry.
Which one?
Yeah. So basically, when we talk about biodiversity and human well-being, I mean, you all know that there are a lot of links that we depend on, what we call ecosystem services, is basically environmental services for our human well-being, and that any loss of biodiversity has a direct negative effect on our well-being. Julian, yeah, now you're, okay. No, just go back to that, please, to the previous slide. Yeah. So loss in biodiversity will, of course, affect our food security because there will be less food, our vulnerability, because we might not be protected from diseases, our health, our energy security. Clean water is the most obvious, if biodiversity is being degraded. And then also our freedom of choice, because often, we choose to on a nice vacation to the Red Sea in Egypt, and if biodiversity is degraded, then of course the choice for recreation and also for relaxation and also for cultural events and will be severely restricted. Okay, Julian, let's not do the video. Just get out of this and just let's do the presentation, please. Okay. And then there has been in 2021 a very interesting research done by someone called Dasgupta. He has done so on the request of the British government. And this Dasgupta review that came out in February of this year explains a little bit, the economics of biodiversity. So the idea is, how can we make sure that in our decisions about economic behavior, in our investment decision, that we don't forget about biodiversity, but that we actually make decisions that include, what we call natural capital, because, we have social capital that includes things like health and education, and we have the produced capital, which are like machines and cars, etc. And then we also have natural capital, which is basically the natural assets that a country holds. So it would be like in Egypt, it would be things like the Nile, the oceans that we have, the forests that we have. So that's what we call the natural capital. And it's important to balance and, make sure that we have enough stock of the three, the social capital, produced capital, and natural capital. And in the Dasgupta review, he says, what are the kind of institutions that can help us to make sure that we conserve natural capital and that we protect nature. And he looks at different actors here, and who are really important. So one is the civil society, of course, that where we have organizations that try to kind of train people and to protect and advocate for protection of nature. We have the local communities who often have very important traditional and indigenous knowledge about for the preservation of nature. We have transnational, international organizations, and these are really important when it comes to protection of transborder areas, things oceans, for example, or big forests like the Amazons, it's not enough that one nation protects it, but it's really like, you have to make sure that it's protected across borders, and there's an international consensus on how to protect them. Then there are also markets. You can provide incentives for protection of nature, so putting higher prices on on natural products. Then there are the household decisions, like how do we consume? How do we, what kind of choices do we make? Are we using plastic bags? Are we wasting a lot of food or other materials? And then, of course, then there are the states who make really important kind of decisions about protection of neighbor. So I think, these kind of actors, how they work together, what kind of decisions they make will have a really big impact on how we protect or not nature and our natural capital. And then there's also the question of trust. I think the Corona crisis again has shown a lot that the issue of trust between citizens and governments and international institutions is really important, because when citizens don't trust their government, then they're not likely to comply, or there will be other ways of doing things. People will not pay, for example, taxes. So I think the trust issue is really, really an important one when it also comes to the protection of biodiversity. Next slide, please. Yeah, and institutions are really, really important. Can you still hear me? Okay. Really important because they provide us with the kind of the trust and the clear rules that we need to observe and monitor and make sure that there's an enforcement of environmental rules and regulations. So that's on the left side. Whereas ineffective institutions, there's often a lack of trust, corruption, and then it's very difficult to ensure proper protection of the environment. Next slide, please. Next slide, yeah. So basically now there is an international consensus that the economy is not something that is outside of the planet Earth, but that we're really embedded within the planetary boundaries. Everything we do, how we consume, how we produce must be within these boundaries and within the biosphere where we live in, and not kind of something apart. So I think this understanding is not only that we have to respect nature, but that we have to also use solutions for the economy that are nature-based. So that's a little bit the kind of the new vision, that economists are trying to promote, these nature-based solutions, that we find economic or technological solutions to economic problems that respect nature and that are in accordance with nature. Next one, please. As you see here, also in the Dasgupta review, he kind of shows how until the end of this century, the population will grow. So we have an expected growth up to 10 billion people by the end of this century, so by 2100. And you can see the different parts, where the population will grow most. According to this one, it will be in sub-Saharan Africa, so the estimates for population growth. And then in the next slide, Julie, you see the loss of biodiversity from 1970 to 2016, and that you see that in most regions, except with a slight, uphill here for Asia Pacific, biodiversity has been going down really, really substantially and at a very fast rate. Next slide, please. So that leads us a little bit to the question, we have this rising population, 10 billion by the end of the century. And then there is this urgent need, for a healthy environment, because also most of the poor depend on their livelihoods. They depend on ecosystems and nature for their survival, for their food consumption, etc. So here the question is, where should the priority lie? Is it one or the other? Can we have both? What are the kind of policies that we need to integrate both, the well-being of human beings and the environment? So I wanted to have a very short conversation with you. And I think the easiest thing is if you just kind of raise your hand so that we can have this discussion. What do you think is more important, the right to food or the right to a healthy environment? So if you think that the right to food is more important, we will have now two speakers who say that the right to food is more important, and please bring forward your arguments. And if you think the right to a healthy environment is more important, we will have then two speakers who will say why they think the right to a healthy environment is more important. So please, can you raise your hands, and then Julian can actually give you the floor. Is that possible? So who thinks the right to food is more important? Please raise your hand.
Hello? Hello? Yes.
You only one?
لا بعدين انت شحنت. لا سبت مشيت. طيب خلاص يا ماما شوف ال 200 ده خدت الكارت خدت ال
Okay, anyone who thinks the right to food is more important than the right to
صلاح من فضلك
healthy
اقفل
environment?
المايك لو سمحت.
أنا أحمد سبع الليل. الحقيقة إن هو يعني
I'm Ahmed Sabah Leil. I cannot choose one of them. I think it is very important to have both parallelly. The right to have health is good, and the right to have right of food is important as well. So I cannot isolate any of them. So they should both move in the same direction parallelly, and I should focus on both of them. I cannot prioritize healthy environment over food or vice versa. Both are related, of course, and they are quite close to each other. Thank you.
Do you have a short translation for me, just a short summary of what the speaker said?
You couldn't hear the translation? Hello? Hello?
Isabel, you have to choose the we have translation, simultaneous translation. You have to choose the channel English, so you can hear the translation in English.
Okay, good, got it. Yep, now I have. Okay, now I have it.
Just, to brief you what he said that both are very important. I cannot choose one of them.
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me now? I'm the interpreter. Okay, he said that both are very important, and they are quite interrelated together. They should move in the same direction, and we cannot focus on one of them over the other. This is briefly what he said.
Okay,
and
perfect.
They should move parallelly. That's what he said also.
Okay, perfect. Anyone who thinks that
على نفس المستوى بالتوازي فكلاهما يتأثر بالثاني.
So both are impacted by each other.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
And anyone else who would say why the right to food is more important or the right to environment is more important? I see two people raise their hand.
صباح الخير.
Good morning.
صباح النور. أيوة اتكلمي على طول يا عريان.
Okay.
Yes, go on.
أنا كنت I'd like to say that if we have a healthy environment, we could have food, and it will not be a problem.
But I didn't understand the last sentence in English, sorry.
If we have a healthy environment, so we will have healthy food as well. So there is no problem.
Okay,
environment system, so we can solve the problem of the food. And environment is the priority more than food.
Okay, So thanks. So you also see that because the food is dependent on a healthy environment, I think, Alia, yes. So that's
Yes.
why you think that they need to go together, yeah? Because
Yes.
you cannot have food if you don't have a good environment. Thank you. I think
Yes.
that's a very good point also. Thank you so much.
Okay, I want to add something. اوكي انا شايفه انه احنا هنا بنتكلم على
I think here we are talking about food security or maintaining the basic food, not talking about the diverse types of food. What I mean that under the title of access to food, a human being has violated the environment, and of course this turned disastrous. So people cannot get the staple food. But if we are going to perform like that for a long time, we will lose the healthy environment and we will lose the staple food that we need. Not only diversity that we are looking for now. So of course, a healthy environment comes as priority, and that's what determines the types of food that we consume.
Thank you very much. I think that's also a very interesting, argument. Thank you so much. Next one on my screen is Hadel.
أتفق تماما مع علياء وهدير.
Yes, I agree completely with Alia and Hadir.
أيوة كملي يا دينا.
تمام أنا بتفق تماما مع
Yes, I agree completely with Alia and Hadir that healthy environment means that we can have a healthy soil for a healthy planting, and we will have suitable water for irrigation. So if the healthy environment is widespread, this means that we will have healthy generations. But if our goal is to focus on nutrition, as Hadir said, we will have wrong practices. And of course, this will impact negatively the environment in a way or another. So for sure, healthy environment comes as number one in the plans of the states and governments. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's really interesting, all your observations, but it's very interesting to see that while the right to food has been a human right that has been recognized in the, the Treaty on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the right to a healthy environment is still under discussion in the Human Rights Council. And it's only now that, we see it really being recognized as a human right. So it's very interesting that while you all see the links and the importance of a healthy environment, it is only now that the international community sees it as a human right. That will help us then to realize other rights, such as the right to food, as you said, and the right to housing, for example. Thank you very much. Anyone else who has a comment on that question, or can we continue?
أنا ممكن أضيف نقطة. أنا صوتي مسموع؟
Yes, I think
ألو.
أحمد أيوة كمل يا أحمد.
Can I speak?
I have a comment.
طيب.
Yes, we can hear you.
أنا ليا رأي في موضوع الحق في
So about the right to food and the right to healthy environment, both are important and they should be parallel to each other. But on the short term, the right to food should get the priority or should be advanced on the short term in communities. On long term, it will be the opposite. The right to have a healthy environment will take the priority over the right to food. So this is my point of view. Thank you.
I think that's also an interesting point, but unfortunately, a lot of our economic decisions are all short-term, and they're, and often the short-term becomes a permanent state, whereas one invests in the long term because the profits in the economy are made in the short-term decisions and not on the long term. So that's why often it's difficult then, to invest in these long-term decisions that are as important as the ones for the short term, because as other speakers said, if we don't invest in the long term in the healthy environment, then we will have no food in the future. So I think that's a really also interesting, the short term and long term, but I think it's also important that both need to go together. Thank you. Any other comment, please? I've seen someone else who would like to talk.
Naima?
Yes, I think Naima wants
good morning.
to talk.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I think
Yes.
as a concept, the healthy environment is more global, and because we can't have food without living in a healthy environment. I think it's the goal is to have a healthy environment by the tool of having the right to food. The relation is very narrow and is complicated with two concepts. They are going together.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And I think that's, one of the basic principles of human rights is the interdependence of human rights. That you cannot kind of say, oh, I only am in favor of the right to participation, but I'm not in favor of the right to food. Human rights are interrelated and interdependent, and therefore you have to try to promote all of them at the same time. I think that's also something that we see in this discussion, coming out of this discussion. So thank you very much. Can we go back now to the presentation, please? Julian?
Ahmed, that's just a short comment, probably before.
Oh, yeah. Please,
Ahmed
please, go ahead.
Sabelid. Please, very short, please.
كويس؟
كده كمان.
طيب اوكي ثانك يو. الحقيقه ان الاصوات اللي
Actually, all the comments of the colleagues saying that healthy environment is important because food will count on healthy environment. Those are scientific theories, but in reality we are facing different issues.
البيئه اصلا
The environment and the health are not important. What is quite important is the awareness of people. People are not aware of healthy environment. We have 20 million people in Egypt who are illiterate. So we should spread awareness first about sound, healthy habits, and climate change. All these things will have a drastic impact on us. So yes, scientific theories, great, but when we apply them on ground or on each state, whether we are talking about long-term strategy or short-term strategy, this is so difficult. Sometimes we do not take into consideration the political stability. Political stability means we will have long-term investments, and means that we will have good economy, not a fragile one, and we will develop plans. So all of them are interrelated, yes, but who is focusing on healthy environment away from health and away from food, yes, this is great as a theory and looks so good and appealing, but when we apply this in reality, sorry, the result is zero.
Thank you.
I think he's pointing, Ahmed, thanks for that. I think you're pointing to the reality that often there are also trade-offs. Yeah, you cannot do everything at the same time. I mean, you cannot do, sometimes things or policies are contradicting each other. So I think, and as you also said, some things have to have a more short-term character and others have a more long-term character. So there are also trade-offs between choices and decisions. So yeah, thanks for that as well. So I just wanted to give you like a bit more of a real life kind of example, and that's about, the link between human rights and nature and biodiversity protection. Next slide, please, Julian. A lot of these, probably you have seen that already in one of the previous kind of presentations, There is, of course, a lot of links between ecosystem services and well-being and the realization of human rights. Yeah, for example, you know, water is really important for the right to health, for the right to food. You know, we need water, clean air, and clean water to live. The ecosystem services also provide important educational and recreational, you know, services that are really important for our well-being, for our social relations. Think of cultural sites. I mean, in Egypt, you have the pyramids, you know, for touristic reasons. You have, of course, the Nile, which has a very important cultural meaning for many people. And of course, it's also the sources of life and food in your country. So the question, I think, is very kind of obvious how ecosystem services and are constituents of our well-being, you know, how they go together. For example, also flood regulations, you know, it's important for our personal safety, for the safety and the security of the communities. So there is a lot of kind of, there are all these linkages between, you know, the provision of ecosystem services such as food and water and fuel, and the well-being and the realization of our right to health, of our right to, you know, housing, and of our right to, you know, for example, to believe, and our cultural kind of needs as human beings. Next one, please. And you know, and there are a lot of kind of instruments that come from the human rights sphere that are really, really important when we try to protect our kind of environmental assets and the biodiversity. Of course, a lot of the protection come from already from the human rights framework in national legal frameworks. For example, the right to food, the right to clean water and air, that are already in most of our constitutions recognized. And then also their application through kind of investment, you know, by states in water services, in infrastructure, in food production, etc. And then also the whole question of public participation, which is also a basic human rights, yeah, in the conservation of biodiversity. Because in the past, a lot of the conflicts between the conservation and the communities were due to the fact, you know, that people thought that, think of the big parks in Kenya or Tanzania, that it was more important to protect the parks than the livelihoods of the indigenous populations. So often people were driven out of the parks and lost their livelihoods. So often it was, you know, this kind of false opposition between conservation of nature or the livelihoods of people. And I think now there's a consensus that, you know, people who live in protected areas, they need to benefit also from the natural assets that are in the parks. Otherwise, they have no incentives to protect them. And then there's a whole debate and a big program now also between UNEP and the human rights of the UN program on the role of environmental defenders. Unfortunately, in the last years, we have seen an increase of environmental and human rights defenders being murdered, especially in Latin America. And I think, you know, more and more human rights defenders become also environmental defenders, because the question between human rights and environment becomes really, really interlinked. There's a question also of gender mainstreaming in biodiversity conservation. You know, what are the role of women? What has been the traditional role? What are new roles that women have in the protection of conservation? And I think also very much the question of traditional knowledge, because often, you know, indigenous communities and local communities have been able to manage nature and biodiversity in a very sustainable way. And then they have been displaced or pushed out by development projects, you know, national development projects or international development projects. And now kind of there is this return to understand, you know, how have they been managing natural resources in a more sustainable way. So to really kind of make sure that we understand, what has worked in the past and how can we make use of that. Again, the protection of the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, to make sure that they benefit. And then also the whole question of environmental assessments for when you make decisions on protected areas or in development projects, how can you make sure that people participate in this environmental assessments to make sure that, the protection of the environment goes together with the well-being of the local communities. So I think that, the human rights and biodiversity framework really need to come together at some point. Next, please. And then also there is a very strong correlation between restoration and conservation. That restoration is about the action taken to recover from degradation, so very degraded areas, or where there's desertification or where there is a lot of pollution. How can we make sure that these are restored? And then the conservation is really there to prevent degradation, for example, through protected areas where people are not allowed to pollute and where there is a very strict kind of conservation policies. Next, please. And then I've been talking a little bit about this, nature-based solution. What does that mean? I mean, the idea is really that where we're able to increase biodiversity through our action, there is a very high likelihood that we also be able to increase the well-being of the communities. And there are some kind of, as you can see, some examples. Yeah, if you have better, cleaner air and water, you will have improved physical and mental health. That leads to better employment opportunities often. And then also these employment opportunities in the restoration or conservation areas can help then to have provision of sustainable food and medicines, and that again kind of leads to improved physical and mental health and other benefits. So I think this vicious cycle that by protecting nature we also be able to have greater benefits for human beings. And then the next slide, please. Yeah, so, and these are the kind of the different interactions. Again, I think this is really also important to see that by conserving and restoring natural assets, there are more choices for citizens because, they can use these assets, like fish, for example, or wood for the housing. And then also, this is really important, I think, also for journalists, that this also needs to come hand in hand with a kind of, decision making that takes into account natural capital, that, that decisions are made not only on terms of profit or in terms of, economic, on an economic basis, but that really kind of the impact on nature is being taken into account. And that we need a more sustainable consumption and production patterns, so that people actually kind of also in their daily life and in their individual decisions take nature and the impact on nature into account. Then the next slide, please. As you've seen probably by previous speakers, there is now a debate on the post-2020 international framework on biodiversity. And in the recent meeting in China, there was a discussion, what are the new targets? How can we make sure that biodiversity loss is stopped? And you see there is an idea that by 2050, there would be the extinction of biodiversity and of wildlife would be stopped by at least 90% would be maintained. And then the whole question of benefit sharing, what's in the IT targets at the moment, that the benefits from genetic resources and natural resources are shared fairly and equitable. so that the IG targets of benefit sharing for the local populations, that these are being discussed and hopefully renewed. Next slide, please. Yeah, and here you see also the question of, you know, what can we do now also to recognize, you know, the holders of traditional knowledge. How can traditional knowledge holders receive benefits from what they know, for example, about medicine, about plants that can be used against diseases, for example. We know that in countries like Brazil and in the Amazonas region, people have been using traditional knowledge to address the COVID pandemic. And also the question of, you know, how can we make sure that we get additional financial and other resources to protect biodiversity and nature. Next slide, please. And you see in October, on October 13, in the last COP of the Convention on Biological Diversity by the CBD, there is the idea to extend the IG targets until 2030. There is also an idea to have a better link between biodiversity protection and human rights. And the whole question, you know, of participation of stakeholders in the discussion and in conservation is really being enforced at the moment. Next slide, please. So based on this, you know, UNRWA has been asking this question, you know, why do we need a new eco-social contract? Because there are a lot of debates. Next slide, please. Next slide. Because, you know, we have seen through the recent COVID crisis, and also, no slide before, please. The slide before that. No, next. The next, yeah, this one, please stop. Yeah, you know, so there have been a lot of actors, the Secretary General, trade unions, people, journalists, the World Economic Forum. They have all been asking, you know, we need a new social contract because our present contract is broken. And it's broken because, you know, we're affected by multiple global crises, the financial crisis, the COVID crisis now. And inequality has been rising in the last 40 years. And also there is a failure of the present economic model to really, you know, account for what we call nature or natural boundaries of the planet. And we can see that climate change is bringing very fast changes to us. And of course, the health pandemics such as COVID are affecting our... Sorry, I now listen to the, I can hear the Arabic translation. Yeah, so I think it's really important that we have, you know, that we keep in mind, you know, all these crises, you know, why are they happening and what kind of new eco-social contract would we need at the national level, at the global level to address those crises. Next slide, please.
Social contract. We need a social contract to realize.
Okay. So I can hear someone speak, please. Can this person use their mic?
Could you please close the mic, please? Mute the mic.
All participants are kindly requested to switch off their microphones with the exception of the speaker.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Now it's better. And you know, what would be new about this eco-social contract? Why would it be different? And it's called eco-social contract because it would combine the ecological and the social dimension of development. Well, first of all, it would be different because it would really have human rights for all. At the moment, some of the contracts only count for informal workers, for
I'm
women.
so sorry to cut you off, Ms. Isabella, but we as interpreters are facing a problem. There is another voice into our ears other than your voice. So this is causing like distraction to us while interpreting. You can kindly proceed. Maybe it stopped.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I also don't heard it. The idea of human rights for all, so of informal workers, migrants, women. so that they really would be all included in this new eco-social contract, that we would have a new progressive fiscal contract, so that would abolish, for example, fossil fuel subsidies, that would redistribute resources tax system, that we would transform economies and societies so that there would be more sustainable consumption and production. We would have a new contract with nature, where nature would also have rights that can be claimed as part of the constitution, where we would address historical injustices such as slavery, racial discrimination, the land loss of indigenous communities, for example. So these historical injustices which create a lot of problems in our current societies, where there would be a new contract for gender justice, where there would be more equality between men and women, and also new forms of solidarity, because often now it's still us against them. Whereas I think the new forms of solidarity that we need is really us together, against COVID, or us together to stop climate change. So this kind of newer forms of solidarity where local and global communities come together and advocate for change. I think that's something that's really, really also important to address these multiple crises. The next, please. Yeah, and before we stop I wanted to say that UNRWA, together with the Green Economy Coalition, which is a network of kind of trade unions and NGOs, and we would like to form a new network, and we would like to very much invite all of you, because I think journalists are very important actors in such a network, to foster dialogue and debate on, what could a new eco-social contract look like? It could be in a city, it can be in a country. For example, Chile is doing a new constitution, and they have for the first time an indigenous women leader as the president of the commission for the new constitution. How can we make sure that these societies, the vision of societies that we are debating, that we would like to create together, that they are just and green at the same time? So the idea is, how can we really bring the social and the green together in our kind of reporting, in our visioning, and this is why we have created this new network, and the launch will be on the 10th of November, and we will share the invitation to be part of the launch with Julian, who could share it with you then in your library. And then the last slide is a little bit kind of questions, how can you as journalists contribute to the debate on a new eco-social contract? How do you see your role, in that kind of discussion? Because I think it's becoming a global and a local discussion. What additional research would you need to do better reporting, good reporting? What experiences would you like to have to share with other countries from Egypt? And do you have any other questions that you would like to discuss? So I'm happy that we still have another 10 minutes to discuss that. And I'm looking forward to your comments and your inputs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Isabel, for this worthy presentation. And I think some journalists will have some questions, but I have one question before I give the mic to others. You have more than 20 years experience in UN organizations. Could you please tell us how the decision, especially when you talk about economy, environment, is taken with the great powers of the world, especially or particularly, I'm talking about China and United States. How do you convince them of any decision or any point of view about environment, included economy?
I think it's interesting that the recent COP of the biodiversity convention was in China, and I think China kind of agreed also to the new targets, including more financing for biodiversity. So I think in the COPs, everyone has one voice like any others. It's not the case in the Security Council, where we only have limited amount of members, but the rest of the UN meetings, I mean, you know, whoever is a member of the Convention on Biodiversity, for example, you know, has an equal voice, and then it's done as a part of the negotiations. So I think the way to do the advocacy is to have, you know, good arguments. So I think good research is really important. And I think, you know, for example, the climate change, you know, there is this international panel on climate change. When they come up, when they come with their results, I think it's very convincing. You know, the science is very important. We have to base decisions on scientific evidence and not just on beliefs. And then I think you have to show countries, also the big powers, that's in their interest, because they don't, you know, if there's a pandemic like COVID, they are not spared, right? They also will live the effects of big pandemics or big crises. Think of the financial crisis, you know, they're not spared from that. So I think we have to see that it's in our common interest as humanity to take this action together. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have two questions here from Mohsen. Yes, Mohsen.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I have two comments on your communication. The first is about human rights and environment. Actually, I think that in our region globally, human rights activists are not interested in environment, in the sense that they are not enough sensitized to such subjects and need maybe much more training in order to engage them in environmental issues. The second is related to conflicts between local communities and conservation. I don't know if there are studies about such conflicts in our region, because these conflicts, even you told in the past that they took place in Kenya and in sub-Saharan Africa, but such conflicts are already taking place in our region and in Tunisia in particular, the country in which I live. There were a lot of conflicts and even taking place actually between local people and protected areas. Some protected areas have been aggressed and a lot of trees cut, animals killed, etc. This is all. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just say something on that? I think it's very interesting what you're saying, and I think it's that the numbers show that most of the environmental human rights defenders killed are in Latin America, because I think there are more obvious conflicts, you know, of the Amazon, for example, or of indigenous communities being displaced by development projects. So where the link between the human rights of the communities and the deforestation, for example, is more obvious. That's, I think, why it's maybe there's more. You said maybe they're more sensitized, but I think it's because the conflicts are very much linked to environmental conflicts as well. And then the other one, yes, of course, in your region, you know, I used to work in the Great Lakes peace negotiations. And when I came, I wondered why the Egypt embassy was so involved. They wanted to be there in all the meetings. And I didn't understand in the beginning, why is Egypt in the Great Lakes peace negotiations? But because it was because of the water of the Nile. Because Ethiopia wanted to build a big dam. And then, of course, that would have had a terrible impact on the water supply in the Nile in Egypt. So Egypt was doing, you know, using all its diplomatic kind of strengths to make sure that, you know, the dam was not built and that there would be no restrictions from the water sources of the Nile in the Great Lakes region, in Uganda, Burundi, you know, that would affect the Nile. So I think these kind of conflicts, even diplomatic conflicts over water, for example, in your region, are of course very, very important. While they're maybe at the moment kind of addressed at national levels through diplomatic efforts, you know, for example, between Ethiopia and Egypt, but I think, you know, they will also come down in many regions. They come down to the local level. You know, I think about, you know, pastoralist communities between Ethiopia, Sudan, who are fighting over grazing land, over their cattle. So I think especially in arid areas, this is a problem where there's already a lot of conflict at the moment. Yes. So I think it's a
Thank you,
very good
Isabel. We have two more questions, please, because we're running out of time. So Shaimaa Dras, could you please ask your question? Shaimaa?
صباح الخير. Shaimaa saying good morning. Do you get my voice, Mrs. Isabella? Ms. Shaimaa, kindly raise your question right away. We were speaking about the natural capital. How can we conserve it? Particularly, it's depleted, and how can what is the difference between or how can we create a recovery of the natural capital compared to what we have today? How can we restore it? I mean, this natural capital. Rasha is asking you, Isabel, if you got the question from the interpreters.
Yes, so thank you. No, I think the natural capital, of course, I mean, the UNEP colleagues, I think Mohammed from UNEP, he spoke yesterday. There is a whole way of not, calculating the natural capital of each country. That's done by UNEP. And of course, you need financial resources to restore. For example, after mining, often mining companies are obliged by national law to restore areas where mining has been taking place. If you think about water sources that have been polluted, you need to invest in cleaning those water sources. So basically, it's a question of money as well, and political will to make sure that those who pollute or that have been using those natural resources, that they also pay for the restoration. So it has to be part of the deal when a country, for example, gives a mining license or gives a source, water source license, that you make sure that whoever uses this will restore it after the use or will clean it.
Thank you, Isabel. I have another question from Ahmed. هل هناك تحركات دولية من أجل إنقاذ الدول الأفريقية؟
Thank you, Isabel. Actually, Russia's voice is not clear.
I think the translation will translate the
Isabel,
question.
Russia's voice was coming with distortion. Would you kindly ask Russia to repeat the question, because her voice was coming to us with distortion?
Okay, Russia, can you please repeat your question?
Yeah. هل هناك تحركات دولية من أجل
Are there international movements for protecting the African countries from the climate change threats, because the African countries are not able to defend it by their own or to do something about it by their own? So are there any movements in order to protect these African countries from the implications of it? Did you get it?
Yes, for example, I mean, of course, there are also, African initiatives, and one of them is the one on the Great Wall, African Wall. So the idea is that to restore parts of the Sahara by reforesting the Sahara, and then and such provide protection against climate change. And also, of course, to restore and to protect the big forests in the Congo Basin. So I think there are quite a lot of initiatives, and I saw an article in the German newspaper yesterday where local communities, with the help of international NGOs such Survival International, are providing, for example, kind of satellite information to see when foreign companies are coming into their communities to deforestate, the natural kind of the big trees that you're not allowed to cut, that they then provide that information by satellite telephones to international NGOs, who then kind of claim that with the government and also with the companies. So I think there is a lot of solidarity with international NGOs and also government initiatives in Africa trying to build this great green wall. So have a look at it. I think it's quite interesting.
Okay, thank you so much, Isabel. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. So, thank you so much for this important presentation, and I hope to see you again in another workshop, inshallah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to have many of you for our launch on the 11th of November, yeah, to discuss a new eco-social contract. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the training. Bye.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, shukran.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Shukran. Thank you to Isabel, and now we have another speaker on the social effect of biodiversity. It's Dr. Asim Muhammad. He's with us online right now. Dr. Asim Muhammad. He will talk about biodiversity in agriculture. He's an associate professor at the Central Laboratory for Agricultural Climate at the Agricultural Research Center, and he is specialized in agriculture. So he will speak to us about biodiversity and agriculture. Please, Dr. Muhammad. Awesome.
Just a moment, please.
I think yes.
So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Peace be upon you all.
Thank you very much for having me today. And
welcome to the workshop, Dr. Muhammad.
خلينا نبقى عاصم أحسن بعد إذنك يا دكتورة. يعني نشيل الألقاب ونشيل محمد وخلينا عاصم بس مفيش مشكلة.
تمام.
Just saying, call me Asim. We don't want to have like titles, so just say Asim. And also with all protocols observed, I'll be calling you and your names without titles, if you allow me. So we don't want to have any titles here.
To start my presentation about agriculture and biodiversity for sure. So Dr. Rasha said my name and my affiliation, etc. I just want to add, I was a fellow, one of 16 fellow around the world working on the global assessment of EPES, biodiversity and ecosystem services. It was launched in 2019 in Paris with attendance of Mr. President of France. On the other hand, I was a lead author of climate and environmental change in the Mediterranean. This is the first Mediterranean assessment report about the climate change and environmental issues. My presentation, maybe it's about 30 minutes, no more, 35 minutes. I'm going to talk about the preamble, first preamble, a quick preamble about biodiversity and overview of agriculture, meaning of agriculture. I'm going to talk about agro-biodiversity in quick, for sure, biodiversity and agro-biodiversity in quick, because I know Dr. Foda gave you very huge information about biodiversity. He's a prestigious scientist in environmental ministry. And he's my friend also, by the way. I met him in Colombia, Medellin. So also I'm going to give some talk about the human and the environment and the benefits from biodiversity to agriculture and vice versa. And then what should farmers and government do about the biodiversity? This is my end of my presentation. And then I have such extended case study. It's from Malaysia, and it's related to the decision takers in Malaysia. Let's see if we have a time, we can take this extended case study, and let's see what journalists write about the decision maker in Malaysia. I don't know if you can do that in Egypt or no, but let's start. So before I start, I have some tips for you. As a journalist, prestigious journalist for sure, you need to work on yourself. So there is as you see in this on the bottom, United Nations System Staff College. So it's a very prestigious place to find some training courses in so for sure online. Some courses for free and others for fees. So you can go with these free courses. It's like about Paris Agreement of 2015 and some interesting topic. And another one is the global training about climate reality leadership corps. It's by Al Gore. It's a vice president of America. And this one is started 2007. So it's a very prestigious training course. So you can try to apply in 2022 for this one. And I can help you for sure, because I know my presentation today is about the threshold between the huge scientific cooperation between myself and you as a journalist, because there is always problem between how to reach the journalist or to news to just say what you want to say about the environmental problems, etc., etc. So before I start my preamble, this is a very good book. It's a hope. Okay, so this lady Jan just said, "Do you honestly believe there is a hope for our world, for the future of our children and grandchildren?" She said, yes, there is a hope. And she said for reasons, as you said, amazing human intellect, resilience of nature, power of young people, and indomitable human spirits. روح البشرية التي لا تقهر. أكيد هي عندها حق في النقطة الأخيرة. So in general, I should start with some questions like, what is your experience about biodiversity, ecosystem services, and climate change? How you have been impacted? What observations have you noticed, or what you have heard recently about climate change? But due to the time limitation, I'm going to answer on behalf of you this one. But by the way, we have a little quiz in after maybe 15 or 20 minutes, so be ready for these quizzes. But it's individually, because I know there is some problem in internet connection, etc. So it's individual. It's like about simple questions. So this is my first answer. As you know, this is thousands were forced to evacuate from Greece due to the wildfires. It was 3 months ago, and it was disaster, by the way. On the other hand, second answer is in Turkey. There is 1 7-day period, more than 130 forest fires ignited the Turkey. So God bless them. And also let's move to another point. Mexico is losing over 2,000 square kilometers of land to desertification yearly, okay? It means forcing 900,000 people every year to leave these areas. Do you know 2,000 square kilometers equal about 500 acres? So this is a big problem, by the way.
Just we can speak more about the climate.
Yeah, I'm going to add above what I said. In Egypt, we're losing about 24,000 acres, but not for desertification. It's for urban sprawl. So just imagine the big disaster. Even until now, until the moment I speak with all of you, still building on agricultural land, still going. Yes, even after the threats from the Mr. President and other ministers, but there is no way. And this is the last answer for my question: is this farmer? This man is this farmer from Honduras. It's Central America. His name is Luis Alberto Enrique. He said, "I'm farmer, corn, coffee, beans, but I can't make enough to feed my family. We have droughts and then we have floods. So droughts and floods. يعني وقع بين المطرقة والسندان." And he said, "We are headed to Houston, asking God to guide us and protect us." I mean, so I'm going to talk about the agriculture in quick. I know all of you know the agriculture, the type of agriculture, the shape of agriculture. It's okay. Most of them come from the rural areas, but let's give me a quick introduction about this one. Agriculture for sure has different function, such as production food, feed, and fibers, sustaining socioeconomic structures for sure. I guess this is the most important function of agriculture. But let's move about the sustainable development. Sustainable agriculture is one important component of 17 SDGs agreed by UN, by the way, in 2015. But the problem is the trend in agriculture is not moving like sustainable, but it's just going the opposite way. I guess I'm not sure the name, maybe Shaima or some other one said, because the bad practice of agriculture from farmers. She mentioned that the last our previous presentation. Yes, she's right. Due to unsustainable farming practice, many agricultural landscapes face pollution by pesticides, different pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, etc., and fertilizers, for sure, and by erosion, because climate change for sure also is one of the main factors. The type of agriculture for sure different, used in different parts, and depends on very huge numbers of factors such as climate, culture, technology, economics. I don't know if anybody of you study agricultural economics, economic of production. The first chapter is talking about the production factors, our عناصر intake. So they mentioned the production factor is land, labor, capital, and enterprises. And in some other books said technology. So this is the main 4 factors of production. عشان تنتج في الagriculture لازم يبقى عندك العناصر دول.
For you to produce agriculture, you need to have all these elements.
So there is a very big definition for agriculture, but I'm going with the most easier definition of agriculture. It belongs to U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They said the science of practice of farming, including growing crops and raising animals for the production of food, fiber, fuel, and the other products. So what is the overview? What is the agricultural word came from? So English word agriculture derives from the Latin ager or field and colo cultivation. So agricolo, it's a Latin words. So the people or American people, sorry, British people just derives these words and change to agriculture. So it means field or land or tillage in Latin. What type of agriculture? We have 2 types of agriculture: subsistence versus commercial, and arable versus pastoral. Subsistence is very easy for all of us because it's family farming. In Egypt, about 85% of stakeholders is small farmers. And the size of the units they have or land they have, it's less than 3 acres of land. So commercial farming is, in the family farming, this cultivation is only to produce the food and other things to meet the needs of the family farmers and their families. Okay, no more. For example, you know, the people in Egypt, farmers in Egypt, some particular places have 1 qirat or 2 or 3, so they just wait until they can build these qirats or the units. So they start to cultivate some vegetables such as okra or bean or whatever. It's only for meet the needs of the farmers and the family. Okay. On the other hand, commercial farming is cultivation of products. So the main focus of this one is only selling the products. So for sure, this kind of farmers is use technology, high technology, and for increasing the yield and try to reduce the production cost. Also, any one of you has learned about agricultural economics. There is something, say, returner of scale. It means when you have a huge area of the land, so the cost of production will be decreased. So arable versus pasture. Pastoral farming. Arable farming is the production of plants. It's only for food, for consumption by human. So you have some acres to cultivate rice, maize, wheat, soybean, vegetables, horticulture such as mango, olive, etc., etc. And pastoral farming is the production of animals or animal-related products. This also known as livestock. Livestock farmers is to meet the dairy products or meat. To produce or to produce, yes, meat or dairy or milk. This graph is I just read from the Russian journal Agriculture. This is for the people from Russia. It depends on the particular country. So this is the shape of agriculture in Russia. You can see agriculture is subsistence, commercial, and there is some other branches for subsistence and commercial. So it's easy and depends on the policy in individual or particular country. So in Egypt, we have our agricultural policy. We have, as I said, 98% of land in a small area, and there is a big farmers, especially in reclaimed land such as Alexandria Road, Cairo Alexandria Road, and Nobareya, and even the new projects now in New Delta and the others. So this is very huge and commercial farms. So this is a quick profile about the agriculture sector, because I know I don't know most or all of you is Egyptian. So this is a quick information, and actually it's easy to get the whole picture from some different sources such as sector affair, economic sector affairs in agriculture, and Minister of Agriculture and Land Commission. Even for me, I can send you some bulletin about the statistics of agriculture. So in 2019, because this is the latest or new release, total cultivated area in Egypt was 9.3 million acre of Fedan. Fedan, it means 4,200 square meter, acre 4,000. So it's almost the same. Total crop area was 16.3 million Fedan. So what's the difference between total crop area and total cultivated area? In Egypt, we cultivate our land about 2 or 3 times. We have winter season, summer season, and rainy season. So just calculate 3 seasons together and put this number. For sure, we have some about 1.5 million acre or Fedan for horticulture. So it's permanent, so it's fixed. So even winter, nearly it's fixed. The most important point, total value of agricultural production about $500 million. So it's a huge commercial. Total value of agricultural inputs such as fertilizers, pesticides, insecticides, etc., about 187.8 billion. Net agricultural income was 346.4 billion. Just subsidize this one from this one, and it's okay. This graph also show what I said now. The agricultural production or plant production represent about 54% of the total value of agricultural production, and animal production came in the second place, about 35%, and fish production about 11%. This is the graph shows the trade or the consumption of pesticides in Egypt from 2000 to 2019. So in X-axis you can find this 5,000, 10,000 tons, 15,000, etc., and you can find the huge consumption of or the top years of consumption was 2012. With about 14 or 13,000 tons. But by the way, this is an official. There is some black market, you know, or an official trade of pesticide trades. So There's some people say it about more than 2 times than this one, but I'm not sure from this information. But yes, there is a huge commercial or huge trade for this unofficial pesticides trade. And then there is some decline from 2012 until 2015 and up again, reach about 14.9 thousand tons in 2019, and actually still going because there is a reclaim for the deserts in Egypt, so we need to pesticides. But there is in agriculture strategy said in 2035 they will cut 50% of the pesticides use. I hope. So this kind of ecosystem, this is a food web. You mean as one of you also said, the people just make some anthropogenic, or just say make the industrial revolution and cultural revolution and use a lot of coal to build the civilization such as England, France in 1750. So there is some problem in this food web. For example, leaf, earthworm and slug and wood loose is just food from leaf, and earthworm bird food on the earthworm, and fox also eat earthworm. Let's say, for example, if earthworm just distinction انقرضت. So there is a big problem, by the way. So you will find decrease in the number of just a moment. Yeah, I admit the number of bird or fox. So this is like خلل في نظام. You got it. You got what I mean. So this is a big problem, by the way. So what is? I know other speakers talk very much of very huge information, gave you huge information about biodiversity, but in just quick brief about biodiversity, okay, Salah. So we can say, we can refer biodiversity to 3 things: genetic variation, ecosystem variation, and species variations. This is the number of species. For example, species variation, you know, we have more than 200,000 variation of wheat. So we have a wild variant, wild species, or the main one, and the people just start to put genetic. Let's say we have heat waves, so the scientists said we need to just bring or make a new species of wheat is heat resistance or pesticide resistance. So this is the problem. You just bring the wild variants or wild genetic, and to start to work. What do you want? Do you want to anti-flood or water resistant or saline resistance? So whatever you want. So agricultural biodiversity represents the variety and variability of animals, plants, and microorganisms that are used directly or indirectly for food and agriculture, if only considering the soil. So what mean of if only considering the soil? So I'm not talking about the whole picture of agrobiodiversity. I'm going to take the soil, only the soil. Many types of bacteria, you know, this is the topsoil of the layer of agriculture or arable lands, contain many types of bacteria, fungi, nematodes, springtails such as this one, this photo. This is the earthworm. So I guess most of you saw this one because this one we only use to extract vermicompost. Vermicompost is such as compost to make the soil fertile. Okay. This just feed on some organic matter such as the residues of the food of house or whatever, newspaper, etc., etc. So it's kind of recycling, and produce some very clean vermicompost. So all these types included or this considering in the soil. So this one is provide or just the digestion, this bacteria or fungi digest manure or other crop residues in the field, and this digestion process release nutrients for sure, NPK, for crops, and at the same time contribute to the carrying capacity of soil. This is gave the soil the fertility, these small animals or microclimates or microbacteria or nematodes or whatever. Okay. So agriculture and environment. Let's say this one. Between 1960 and 2000, FAO said, FAO, UN Food of Agriculture Organization said yields across all developing countries rose to 108% for wheat, 109% for rice, 157% maize, etc., etc., etc. FAO 2017 said by 2015 global agricultural production had tripled. Yes, for sure, with positive impacts on food security, economic growth, and poverty reduction. Okay, on the Egyptian level or on the domestic level, and there is a big jump in terms of yield of some crops such as rice, maize, and this is the most important, rice and maize. In 1960, the yield was only, I talk about rice, okay, almost 1 ton per faddan. So now the yield of the rice can reach 3 or sometimes 4 ton per faddan. You see that this is a big jump in terms of yield. On the other hand, rice, wheat, sorry, you can find it was about 6 ardab. Ardab, it's equal 155 kilogram. Now you can find some variety of wheat such as Nahda Masr or Gemez or whatever. It's about 32, 35 ardab. It's certificate seeds, by the way. And it's not so expensive, but it's okay. It's a huge area, 2-3 faddans because it's a little bit expensive. Anyway, to achieve this development in the yield and other things, as you see in this slides, these high yields require the application of large amounts of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and rising concerns about causes and potential environmental harms. So this is a huge trade, as I said, these pesticides and insecticides. China is #1 in terms of pesticides. #2 is America, Spain, Argentina, Brazil. So these big countries in agriculture, they use very huge amount of this one, pesticides and insecticides and herbicides. Okay, so this global assessment said 1 million species at risk of extinction. This is the manchette or highlight of our report. Okay, so the threats to biodiversity. We have 5 threats to biodiversity: change in land and sea use, including habitat loss and degradation. I know you know all this right now: species overexploitation, invasive species and disease, pollution, climate change. As you see, this is a graph designed by API. It just mentioned 5 main threats to biodiversity. And for climate change, there is a very huge impact. You know, before 2014, the AR4 assessment report number 4, number 5, sorry. Before the AR5 just launched, the main threat of global warming was rising temperature, okay? The main one or main factors: rising temperature, sea level rise. And after AR5, all science say the extreme weather events is most threat of, or most threat, yes, for global warming. We need to take our care about the extreme weather events such as flood, drought, etc., even the forest fire or wildfires. So this is due to increasing of CO2 emission. You know, okay, this is a question. I'm going to say that the amount of emission right now of CO2, but no, this is a question in the next slide. So let's take a question, see if you can complete this sentence or not. I have 4 questions. I guess it take only 4 minutes or 3 minutes. So if you just know, open your mic and tell me the right answer. Please. Just match these 2 columns together. Choose one from here to matching this one, and etc. Any answer?
Yes.
Please.
السؤال الأول اللي هو أعتقد إجابته هي آخر إجابة.
The first question, I think the answer is 41.5 GT CO2 per year.
انت حضرتك بتقول ان في اول واحده اللي هي
So you are saying here that in 2018 global annual CO2 emissions surpassed 41.5 gigaton per year. Is that what you mean? Am I right? Ahmed? No. Yes. Okay, go on. I think we should go question by question to make sure that the answers are right. No, you are a journalist. You are fully aware of these things. Okay, go on. Shaima is raising her hand as well. Shaima Draz.
بس مش عايزين نقعد كتير في الحته دي لان
we don't want to take much time in this part because the time is striking.
يمكن دكتور
Ahmed, you can go on as well. Doctor, the first with the third, okay. The second with the second, and the third in 2017 will be related to 405.
ولا انا غلطان؟
ايوه صح هي اللي بتكلم
Yes, she's the one who's speaking. Yes.
اكيد الاجابه صح.
So I think Shaima is complaining from the sound. No, yes, it's correct.
Greenhouse gases such as CO2 remain in the atmosphere for years.
Greenhouse gases such as CO2 remain in the atmosphere for years. Yes, and trap some of the energy that comes from the sun. The last part, the CO2 concentration, I was about to say it, but I could hold myself. Now it surpassed 405 ppm. But let's say that today is about 420 ppm. And if there is more time, I can talk about climate change. Not today, but if we meet on any day, for sure, there are many things that I'd like to say about climate change. Thank you so much, Ahmed and Rasha. Would you please leave your contact, doctor, your email or mobile? Please leave them in the chat box. And also, I'm going to leave you the presentation, the short one, because this is about 40 megabytes, and I don't have a medium.
كلام عربي.
So the question number 2.
Oh, okay.
So this is the right answer. This is correct. Okay. So there are currently 7.8 billion people on the planet. So what do you think the world population is projected to be by 2030? شيماء لو رفع ايدك اتفضلي.
Shaima, if you are raising your hand, please go ahead.
أيوة صوتي كده واصل؟
Can you hear me? Yes.
إجابة السؤال التاني
أيوة
إجابة السؤال التاني هي إجابة السؤال التاني صح؟ هي اللي قصادها يعني.
لا ما فهمتش معلش. تقصدي ان اجابه السؤال الثاني تبقى نمبر بي يعني ولا ايه؟
The answer of the second question is the second square. Do you mean number B? Yes.
تمام. حد عنده اجابه ثانيه ولا
Any other answer?
لا تمام يا دكتور تقريبا مفيش حد رفع.
Okay, doctor. No more raised hands.
لان خلي
Okay, Shaima, correct.
Let's say احنا each 11 years.
Let's say that within 11 years.
فشيماء كانت يعني الإجابة بتاعتها كانت مظبوطة ف almost 8.5 billion. وفي بعض الexplanations أو more information for you إن تقروها. بعد كده question number 3, if nothing changes, the world population will only have % of the water it needs by 2030. Any answer?
I think it's 44, number C.
هايل هايلة. Thank you very much.
C, 44%.
Excellent.
Yes, great. Excellent.
الانسر طبعا او الاكسبلانيشن بتاع الموضوع. So my last question is question number 4. Which of the following cities faced the threat of day zero in 2018 when the government planned to turn off water taps across most homes and business to conserve supplies? I know it's a little bit difficult, but even think about what what the city suffer from the scarcity of water from these four cities. So you will find the answer.
أعتقد إن الإجابة C.
تمام برافو. بس حد عنده إجابة تانية؟
Cape Town, South Africa.
أحمد السيد اللي اتكلم صح؟
أعتقد مكسيكو سيتي.
تمام إيمان تمام. مين بقى اللي هيقول ميلبورن استراليا؟ حد يقول كده عشان نبقى ايه اخترنا الاربعه. تمام ماشي. هو thank you very much for your guess. It's okay but
أنا أعتقد إنها سي استراليا.
تمام انا همشي مع كلام احمد اللي هي كيب تاون. احمد سيد انت قلت كيب تاون صح؟
كيب تاون مكسيكو سيتي.
طيب انا همشي مع كيب تاون
ساوث افريكا.
بالظبط. انا همشي معاه او همشي مع اللي قال كيب تاون ساوث افريكا وبالتالي
it will, yes, it is Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm going to give you a quick example. I was in one of the meetings of EBS. I'm going to speak in Arabic. So it was heavily raining on this day, and it for 24 hours, unstoppable. So I just called the man saying that I'm going to send you a car. The receptionist, I told him, yes, it is unstoppable rain. So I took the car. There was no water drop in the street. They are working every day to do water harvesting because they are suffering a lot from a water problem. And this city is considered to be a piece of art, not to waste a drop of water. We hope that we can do the same. So
questions بتاعتي.
I'm done with the questions. Quickly, I just to break the boredom. I know that the virtual conferences sometimes are boring, so I'm going to now introduce these slides. I know time is striking, so let's now talk about ecosystem services.
Provide services.
Ecosystem services are the direct and indirect contributions ecosystem,
materials
whether for human well-being or materials or goods.
Of the ecosystems, benefits from nature. So there is 4 types of ecosystem. First one is provisioning, and it's such as food and drink, natural medicine, water supply, renewable energy, etc., etc., etc. And second one is regulating. هي تنظيمية أكتر شوية. Regulating services such as clean air. أكيد the ecosystem support us or provide us with clean air. Carbon storage. As you know, if you want to mitigate the CO2 emissions, you should to grow more trees. Pakistan have the idea of planting more than 10 billion trees during 10 years. Ethiopia, they have the world record. They plant about 368 trees per day. Okay, so we should work on this side. Flood management because you know this mangrove planting is try to or avoiding the flood of sea. So mangrove, one of the benefits of the ecosystem. Erosion control and pollination, etc., and so on. And third set is supporting, and you can read it. It's very easy. And last one is culture, such as tourism and recreation, inspiration, etc. So this is one for marine, and you can just read what each one, because it's very easy and it's very clear. So one of the most important one, agriculture benefits from biodiversity, and biodiversity benefit from agriculture. Okay. The importance of agriculture biodiversity. Agrobiodiversity means agriculture biodiversity. Okay. I just give you, as I said in my old example or my last example, it's bacteria and fungi. It's very important to give the land fertility. We can go also for another one. You know, the agriculture generally aims in the short term to produce large quantities of food against the lowest economic costs. So this term, or this short term, lead to conflict with the conservation and management of biodiversity. So this one is importance of agricultural biodiversity is living organism and involved in all natural process. Okay, so I'm going with this one is very quickly. Biodiversity can benefit from agriculture. I give you only one example. You know this common voles. Common voles species is Microtus arvalis. Okay. I don't know if you know this one. This is فأر الغيط اللي هو فيكم شاف الكلام ده في فار في الغيط كده فهو يعني اسمه common voles. So common voles ده نفسه الكيس بتاعتنا ده the people found in north of Netherlands. These common voles caused extensive damage to the grassland and for sure the milk production. And then the negative effect on human health. The scientists discovered this one because, you know, there is a change in the table water, in groundwater. There's a lowering in the groundwater table in these lands, and the the government start to recover this problem, and they try to increase the water table, and then the common voles population decrease, and on the other hand, there is a increase in grassland productivity for sure, and increase in the milk production. Okay, and the pollination for sure. We have the bees and paired butterflies. Pollination is just to move some pollens from the to male organisms to female organisms to produce some fruits, etc. تلقيح يعني. And this is important of bees. يعني ممكن تقروها مفيش مشكلة. خلينا أقول إن
You can read it.
دي يعني have some threats because the using of pesticides and herbicide or sprawl. So this one is negative decline or affecting negatively for these bees. And let's see this one. لك أن تتخيل إن البيس هي طبعا المين pollinators.
The bees are the main pollinators.
About 153 billion euro. This one represents 9% of the total economic value of agriculture. لك أن تتخيل إن أنت لو حصل بس أنت عمال تستخدم في الفيرتلايزرز والبيستيسايدز إيه الضرر اللي هيحصل للصناعة دي أو اللي هي الصناعة القائمة على البيس.
So using pesticides, of course, will impact this negatively. You can write about this article if you'd like.
أكيد climate change for sure, humidity, الديزيز بتاعت البيز نفسها, الايكو سيستم, as you said, logging والحاجات اللي هي صناعة الأخشاب والكلام ده كله. Even in the most important point اللي هي pesticides والfungicides والحاجات دي كلها. This is a FAO source. This is a new reports from FAO. برضك يعني زي حاجة زي كرتون كده أو حاجة بتبقى جميلة.
It's a kind of animation. It is interesting that they are about to extinct.
We need to consider biodiversity as important as climate change. In 1992, there is big two conventions. So Convention of Biological Diversity and UNFCCC. Okay, let's see now. This month we have COP, Conference of Party 26 on climate change, and COP 15, Conference of Party number 15. So I just talk about the gap between this one. Why the most governments or presidents or scientists give more importance to climate change and less important to COP? Because you know these two conventions start together at the same time in the same conference. It was in Rio, 1992. And each 2 years, you can find this COP of biological diversity, and each year there is a COP for climate change. So I don't know. This is big question mark about this point. And by the way, Egypt nominate for COP27 to host COP27, inshallah, next year in Sharm el-Sheikh. Let's hope. So 3 years ago, Egypt hosted COP14 for climate, for biological diversity, and inshallah next year we will host COP26. So what can farmers, the most important point right now, what can farmers and governments do? For sure, there is steps that farmers and policymakers can do, such as the organic agriculture. So we have now, or many launched the law of organic agriculture. IPM, integrated pest management. It depends on very little amount of pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers, maybe irrigation management, to change from the flooding irrigation to drop irrigation. So this is a good one. And for sure, it depends on the people and or farmer and the policymaker. We can control the crop environments. As you see, this is a Spanish greenhouse. It's the area is about 1 acre, 4,200 meter. So the benefit from this greenhouse is covered by net screen, not plastic. So this gave some good advantages against the pesticides or pests and insects. So this save about 50 or 60% of fertilizers and sorry, not fertilizers, pesticides and insecticides used in open field. So also the yield trebled, or it's more than treble in comparison with open field. There's different color of net screen. And there is also polyethylene tunnels is okay, just to avoid forest in the winter. And this is roof garden. I guess if any one of you just visit us in Climate and Central Laboratory or CLAC, my work, they will find this one. It's okay. And we have too much shrink course about this one. And also we can talk about conservation agriculture. Okay. This one is what FAO said about conservation agriculture. Spontaneous minimum mechanical soil disturbance and permanent soil organic cover and species diversification. So this is the main point of conservation agriculture. And this is one also is very good one, but it's not applied in Egypt. I don't know why. Paying farmers for environmental species, or PES. PES takes several ways of improving incentives to farmer, such as price premium for eco-labeled agricultural products, or direct payment for improving land use. I guess I'm not sure in this one. Maybe NGOs in Egypt can do that for farmers, on behalf of farmers. I'm not sure. I have no idea. But in the global one, you know, some institutes paying or make some project on the countries such as Africa or Asia, and pay money on behalf of farmers to getting improve or to improve the soil. Just I like this idea, by the way. Okay, so actually I'm done for my my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. This is selected references. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asim.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for this worthy presentation. Before I give the mic for questions, I have two questions about figures. there is a slide where mentioned. I will speak in Arabic, please, just to communicate the idea about these figures. دكتور حضرتك في سلايد من
in one of the slides you were talking about 543 of the number of fedans and the net income of agriculture in Egypt. Is it billion or half billion? Billion, which is in Arabic milliard. So what do you mean? Do you mean half billion or 534 billion? The same as for the income, the agricultural income in Egypt. Is it 148 billion or 1.78 billion? No, I'm talking here about Egyptian pounds. So is it 346 billion, the agricultural income to Egypt? No, it's not the main income. Yes, let's say that all what you're saying is correct. What do I do here? I have this big number, which is 534.2 billion. This is comprised of the total agriculture production, meaning that
رمان برتقال مش عارف ايه ببيعه سواء على مستوى السوق المحلي او التصدير بال9.5 او ال10 مليون فدان اللي عندي غير الفدادين اللي استصلحت ولم تضاف بعد بيجيب لي حوالي
million that I have. Of course, I'm not talking here about the reclamation.
لحد معين ده للفلاح.
Yes.
المزارع الصغير والمزارع الكبير والمصدر.
So this is for the farmer or the exporter, the small farmers and the big farmers. So this includes or comprises everyone who is working in the agriculture sector. But of course, this is all the figures. So it might reach trillion now. So if we talk about fedans here, which is in the fertile lands, we say that the black soil, is it 9 million فدان?
لا نص كلام حضرتك مظبوط. هي بقت سودة دلوقتي. لكن
what you are saying is correct. Now محمد علي باشا Egypt 1805 they left about 8.5 million
سوري 5.5 مليون فدان مش 8.5
sorry 5.5 million fedans or about 6 million fedans. The reclamation was about 2 million fedans during the past 20 years, not actually 20 years, starting from 2000 till 2005 or 2006, we reached about 8 million fedans.
بس هي مشكلتنا مش بنزيد بس احنا بنزود.
So but there is a population increase as well, but we are losing as well 27,000 fedans every year because of the earnest brown. And we cannot stop the president stoking and it's because of the urbanization. And of course there are other factors, but we don't have enough time to talk about them. But as you can see, are correct.
طيب انا كده تمام. في اسئله ثانيه ولا
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا جزيلا.
Any more questions?
طيب انا ليه بس انا
any other question?
عندي سؤال صغير.
Yes, I have a question actually.
انا صوتي واضح؟
ايوه في احمد.
Clear. Dr. Mr. Ahmed wants to have the floor.
ايوه اتفضل يا احمد.
الدكتور ذكر في بداية حديثه
Doctor, at the beginning of your speech, you were mentioning some sorts of initiatives or some courses. You have been mentioning some UN courses that we can get as journalists. Can you help us with this, Doctor? Dr. Asma is saying, actually, don't call me doctor. I prefer to be called in my first name. Anyway, that's my number. You'll find it in the chat. That's my WhatsApp.
training course.
Yes, there are lots of training courses, but the problem came with the pandemic because it has caused lots of lockdowns. 2 years ago, I had been sent in Uganda that they needed 5 to 6 Egyptian journalists to be trained on climate change in Uganda. This was just 2 years ago. And actually, it was at the beginning of COVID-19. Our COVID-19 problem, it started later than China and the rest of the world, but earlier than Uganda. And also there is another training for journalists that I have seen a couple of days ago. I would see if the email is still there or not, but the two things that I have sent you, I told you about at the very beginning in my presentation, you'll find it online, that UN organization, UNSSC Day. That is really very good when it comes to what you may know, like Paris Agreement related issues, climate change related issues, sustainable development, the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. This course is really very good, and you'd have a multiplicity of different cultures to be with you. So this is fair enough for you for exposure until the pandemic is over. As what I've told most of you, the leadership training, this is another course. It is the deputy president, former deputy president of the United States, and he has an institute, Al Gore. Inconvenient Truth. I don't know if you know Al Gore. He has that Inconvenient Truth. It's one of the most important sort of movies about climate change, and he's having his own institute. He is working away from the politics now, and he has like a couple of dozens or more of experts in the field. So maybe you can next year apply for this training. Might be next year it wouldn't be face-to-face, it would be virtual, but it would be covering each and everything, or maybe afterwards, and actually it's being held in different countries. You can go to different countries, Indonesia, India, Indonesia, or some other countries. We are having actually you have my contact information at your pick and call. I'm so sorry, Dr. Rasha, for taking much time, more time than what was expected to me. Just I want a way to send the presentation to you. I want to share the presentation with you, so let me know how. You can send him the presentation and he will share it on the website. Thank you so much for this worthy presentation.
My pleasure.
And hope to see you again in other workshop. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Now we have the third. Salam alaikum. Now we have the third speaker on this session, Mr. Michael U.K. Song from the ILO, International Organization, Labor Organization. He will speak about social approach of biodiversity about employment. Please, Dr. Michael.
Yes. Hi. Good day.
Yes.
Hi. Good.
Yes. Welcome. Mr. Michael,
Thank
would
you.
appreciate if you can kindly come closer to your microphone because the voice is coming with a bit of an echo. It's clear, but it's coming with a bit of an echo. So thank you, sir.
Is it now? It's okay now, the sound? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Maybe you can raise your voice a bit.
Okay, I'll try and speak a little bit louder. Is that okay now? Is that better?
Yes, your sound is clear.
Okay, great. Okay, well, good.
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. It is a pleasure for me to be here. I hope I can provide some interesting inputs and some ideas to you this afternoon. I'm gonna I don't have a presentation. I'm gonna speak to you directly for a few minutes, and then I hope there's some opportunities for questions and discussion. I am not clear exactly what you've been exposed to yet this morning, so maybe hopefully there's still some ideas that are new and that will help your discussion along in these days. So what I work for the ILO, this is the International Labour Organization. For you, some of you may not be familiar with it. We are one of the UN specialized agency. We are actually older than the UN. We were started when the League of Nations was started after World War I. But kind of survived the League of Nations and joined the UN when the UN came about after World War II. And we are, our focus is on the world of work. So you could see us as a UN agency on the world of work. So we focus on a number of issues, maybe most easily summarized in more and better jobs. So we have an important focus on increasing jobs and making sure that everybody who is willing and able to work has opportunity to do so. That's the more work. And then the better work part is really that we try and improve jobs, be it the conditions of employment, things like safety at work, discrimination and harassment, but of course also salaries, access to social security, social protection, etc. So this is really our focus area as a UN organization. The area I work in, really, I really work in the employment policy department of the organization. So we really look at what are the kind of policies that can create more jobs. And the specific area I focus on really is around what we call public investments very broadly. So this includes what we all think about as public investments, things like infrastructure or investments in schools, etc. But increasingly, we see that actually nature, ecosystems, and the environment are also require public investment. That the deterioration has impacted, on the one hand, they've been deteriorating, so they require investment to recover or to expand again. And it's really the state, the government that has to lead this, because this is really a classic example of a public good. Yes, the private sector will, in some cases, when they have a very specific part of the environment, when it's in their benefit to invest in, they would. But often the environment is things like clean air or clean water or soils are really public goods, and so it's really the state that has to take the lead to invest in these, if these are going to be covering or staying, remain in the standards or the level of the quality that we require this to be in. So as part of my work, then we look at what at one role the state can play in leading these investments in ecosystems and biodiversity. So one of the areas I look at is ecosystem restoration, for example, where degraded land is then restored again, reforested, or depending on the ecosystem, maybe grasslands, but that it's able to recover and that nature is then able to fulfill its role. So the sub-themes of my discussion really are ecosystem services, biodiversity, and jobs. And I think biodiversity and jobs probably don't require much further elaboration. But I want to be just want to check if everybody is kind of familiar with the notion of ecosystem services. People have been exposed to that, or is this something I need to? Has this something been discussed today, for example, as well? Or not? Any?
Naam.
Yes, sir, we know this.
Okay, so we are familiar with the okay, so I think. Thank you, Ahmed.
Some people say yes, some people say no.
Okay, so some people say, okay, if it goes both ways, I think it's maybe so ecosystem services really one can think of the services that nature provides to us, and through the ecosystems that are part of nature, and it's services that are valuable to humanity. So I mean, perhaps the most obvious one is the air and oxygen, and nature plays an important role in releasing, creating oxygen through plants in the air we breathe. So this is one, but also water. In many environments, river water or water from is provided by nature. So it's a service that nature provides to us. And actually many of the economic activities are really not possible or are really much more difficult if these ecosystem services are no longer available. And which then takes me to the work that we've done, because in 2018, ILO released a report which was based on quite a bit of research done to look at the relationship between jobs and ecosystem services. And we concluded at the time that about 1.2 billion jobs are really directly dependent on ecosystem services. And here we think of jobs in a number of key sectors, agriculture, of course, but also fisheries, forestry, the water sector, as well as in many countries, tourism. So the relationship between the jobs in these sectors and ecosystem services nature provides are really quite strong. And so if we see that in many countries, for instance, if nature collapses or there's not enough water provided anymore, then we see agriculture the productivity of agriculture goes down, and the jobs in that sector get impacted. So when we think about this relationship, then I think it's useful to think of two kind of sets of relationships. One is the one I just explained, where there are a number of jobs that are really directly dependent to some extent on ecosystem services. In Egypt, I have been to Egypt a few times. I don't know it very well, but for instance, one area, for instance, that I know because I went is the diving tourism on the Red Sea. This is really very much dependent on if you think of coral reefs and the life on those reefs as a service. That's the tourism. The tourism is really intricately related to that, and so all those jobs in tourism in the area will be impacted if the coral reefs in the Red Sea are also destroyed or impacted or deteriorate quite significantly. So this is then an example of where jobs are very much directly linked to ecosystem services. The other angle to think about it is, can we create jobs through restoring those ecosystem services or through restoring ecosystems? So this is another.
شأنها أن تعيد هذه الطبيعة إلى ما كانت عليه. بمعنى
and this then, if we go back to the same examples, these are the jobs related to, for instance, if people are Coast Guard or people who are working in this area to protect the reefs and making sure that there's no poachers who come or that the rules are followed, etc. These are the separate category of jobs. These are then jobs that directly work on creating or promoting ecosystem services. So these are two ways to look at this thing. Now, if the biggest and most important one is really this question of the sectors that are really dependent on ecosystem services. And the real risk we see now is that as nature deteriorates, also we see that the quality of these jobs can deteriorate. And this can lead to lower productivity and leads to lower income or lower salaries for people working in that sector. We see that job quality then deteriorates, and ultimately we see jobs disappearing completely if the ecosystem services become. And I think the most common example of that in many countries is around agriculture, where land deteriorates. Of course, these things are exacerbated by climate change and other factors as well, so they don't act alone. But if some point the land becomes so degraded that it cannot sustain farmers anymore, then essentially those jobs in agriculture that are destroyed or become so bad and people so unproductive that people have to leave and migrate and find a livelihood in another sector or another part of the country. And this is something that really, if one pays attention, one can, or it's visible in many countries, it depends a lot. And here, I'm not sure. And you maybe we can talk about that a little bit, how if some of this can be observed in Egypt as well. But for me, an experience I've had, which will always stay with me very much, was that I was once in India, and we were staying in a hotel that was on the beach, and there were all these fishermen who had put a huge net in this bay, and they were pulling out this net. And we were standing there, and they were heavy, so they said, "Oh, we should come and help." I was there with a group of colleagues, and we started helping to pull this net onto the shore. It was very heavy and really very long, and very long time we were there pulling and helping. And then after all this time and effort, and I think there were at least 30 people, 40 people involved in pulling this net up, this net came out, and there was hardly a little bucket of fish in this huge net. And it really hit home for me that actually, you know, this is not, it's not really sustainable. You know, these 30 people who worked that time, it's not even enough fish for those 30 people, let alone for the fishermen who took their little bucket of fish home and had to make a living out of that. So this is where then, if ecosystem services, ecosystems collapse, which in this case, it's of course a very anecdotal observation from my side, but and there's no more, you know, fish available, then the livelihoods of these fishermen and in this region are severely impacted. People may need to leave. So this is really and so really the driving, so from a job side, and a really important dimension of what we call ecosystem restoration is to allow ecosystems to then support the jobs in those sectors and to make sure that those jobs are productive and remain attractive. And so this is a very economic argument. Of course, there is, and probably many of you will have, or many of the previous speakers may spoke about that of course there are other, there's inherent value to nature, and there's inherent value to biodiversity. Some people say even if it has no economic value, or we don't make money from nature, it's important that we have nature, and you know, and preserve it for its own sake. But there's also here a very argument I'm making is that there's in many sectors a very strong argument and relationship between the state of nature and ecosystems and the type of jobs that can be supported today. The second element, and this is then an area where we are doing increasing amount of work, is to say, okay, well, can we create jobs through investing and restoring ecosystems? And there's also a term that's increasingly used, which you may have heard as well today, called nature-based solutions, which is essentially a different terminology, but boils down to the same thing, is to say, how do we work nature? How do we, as the UN Secretary General said recently, how do we make peace with nature as humanity, so that the nature can keep supporting us and we can keep supporting nature? And the question there is, how do we, can this also result in job creation itself? And so can people be employed to take care, restore, and protect nature? And this is an area of work that we've been more and more involved in. And in some areas of the world, there is clearly a lot of job creation potential in this. Think of areas that to be where you have to have the large-scale reforestation, where you have to have large-scale soil and water conservation, investments to ensure that erosion is reduced, that soils are restored. So there's one area. Another area is really around agriculture, and we increasingly see there are different types of agriculture. And one area that's often mentioned in this area is agroforestry, which is where agriculture is kind of mixed more with forestry. So you have more of a combination of crops and mixed trees and other crops, and it's better for biodiversity. It's also more resilient. But the interesting part of that is that it's also more labor intensive. And so you create more jobs, you measure it per hectare or per ton of product produced, you need more labor input, partially because it's more difficult in that system to have highly mechanized types of agriculture. So shift to these more sustainable methods of agriculture would also have important implications for jobs in terms of creating more jobs in this sector. But of course, a big question here on this is the cost and the payment and who would finance that. So again, there's a public investment side to this, but you know, for many governments have many priorities, and restoring nature may or may not be. We like to argue that given economic value and the job value, it is important for government to invest. But there may be cases also where specific actors may be willing to invest in this type of restoration and create jobs in the process. And a very common, or one example that we see a lot, are water authorities, those who manage dams and in charge of water supply. For them, often restoring the landscape can have very big positive impacts for them, because it can reduce erosion so that lakes or the reservoirs they have are not silted up. It can improve the water quality, like the water coming, if there's a lot of vegetation, and then there's groundwater that comes into such reservoirs is usually better quality than if there's no vegetation and the water just washes into the reservoir. So for these authorities, and we see more and more that they invest in soil and water conservation and ecosystem restoration in the catchment area of such a reservoir, because this pays off for them. It's from a pure investment side. It's an investment they can make, and they get it back in cleaner and more water available. So that's another, and then with that, then they create jobs in what we call this soil and water conservation and reforestation and activities like that. But of course, we can think about it also in the marine space. So for instance, coastal areas, estuaries, mangrove restoration is another area where there is very clear benefits to the fishery industry and fishery. At the same time, there's also potential to create jobs. So that's really the essence, what I wanted to share. I know we have a bit more time, but I think it would be nice to have some time for some discussion and questions. So maybe, I don't know who's facilitating or moderating this session, but I wanted to maybe say, are there any questions that people have, clarity? And then also maybe I would be quite interested to hear about what's happening in Egypt.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Yuki Song, for this presentation, and open now for discussion. If any one of the journalists will want to ask any question. Yes, Ahmed Sabah Al-Leil, could you please ask his question, please? Yes, Ahmed. ايوه يا احمد اسال سؤالك.
سؤالي هو هل هناك فعلا اصدارات بحثيه او احصاءات رسميه اصدرتها مصر؟
Are there official statistics? I'm sorry, I can't hear the question.
أعيد سؤالك لأنه ما كان بيقطع يا أحمد، وبعد كده اقفل المايك لأن في نويز.
أنا سؤالي بيدور
So my question is about are there official statistics or research statistics that have been issued by ILO about biodiversity and job opportunities? And if they are available, I hope that you can share them with us.
Do you want me to take several questions, or you want me to answer one by one?
One by one, if you want.
Okay.
If you like that, one by one.
So
we have about 3 other questions.
So maybe let's take them one by one. It's easier, and don't have to struggle to remember them all. But yes, there are some.
Yes. Okay. Okay. No problem. No problem.
There are some statistics on this available. A lot of it is on the ILO website. I mean, the starting point on this is perhaps I would recommend is this report. We publish this report every year. It's called the World Economic and Social Outlook. And 2018 report, each year the report has a specific thematic. And 2018 one report was called Greening with Jobs. And in this report, there's a whole focus on job impact and employment parts on greening the economy and how that could impact on employment. So that I think is a good starting point. I'm not sure how much specific statistics and the data there is on Egypt itself. And one we could look into that, and maybe the country office, there's a ILO country office in Cairo. And maybe we're also maybe getting in touch with them on specific information related to Egypt on this. Thank you.
Another question from Mohammed Ashraf.
أنا كنت عايز أستفسر على حاجة. أنا كصحفي مثلا لو هكتب عن
As a journalist, if I'm going to write about biodiversity, so what about the things that are so attractive for the readers who are interested in biodiversity so that they can read more? Of course, there are some citizens who are not interested in anything and also the biodiversity. So how can I make it more appealing for them?
Okay, thank you. So I mean, this is something that for us at least, and the more I work in this area, the more it becomes apparent is that many people may not be interested in biodiversity, but many of those people may well be interested in jobs and the economy. And I think this relationship that actually biodiversity and nature and more broadly and ecosystems have direct impacts and implications for jobs and economy, I think is quite important to create awareness around. So I think maybe the entry point may not be writing about biodiversity, but about jobs, but then bring in the saying actually, raising the question that actually, did you know that many jobs rely on biodiversity, or that increased biodiversity may actually increase jobs in some sectors, or improve jobs in some sector, improve income in some sectors. So I think it provides an entry point, jobs angle provides an entry point maybe to reach a different audience that normally wouldn't really be so keen to read, as you say, about biodiversity. But this is just an idea now from my side. Thanks. Any other?
From Shamad Raz.
Thank you.
السلام عليكم. أنا كنت محتاجة أعرف
Peace be upon you. I wanted to know more examples about the imbalance in ecosystems. No, I wanted to know more examples about the imbalance of the ecosystems that impact directly economic and economies, so that we can highlight such issue. Is my question clear?
Yes, I
أنا ممكن أجاوب السؤال ده كحالة مصر.
I can answer this question talking about the Egyptian case.
Yes, that would be interesting. I would love to hear a little bit more about it as well. So please go ahead. I think it was Ahmed.
احنا مثلا سامعيني كويس؟ احنا مثلا عندنا في راس غارب او في البحر الاحمر موضوع
in Ras Gharib or the Red Sea Governorate, we have the petroleum tanks who get rid of their waste in the Red Sea. And of course, this leads to the loss of biodiversity and the pollution of the seawater. Of course, this reduces fishing and reduces fishes. The fishermen in this area
فالصيادين في المنطقة ديت فرص.
So the fishermen in this area, they have less job opportunities and their income sources have decreased because they are counting mainly on fishing and fishing. So this is a direct relation here because of the exacerbation of this of the pollution, because of the poison, the toxic petroleum wastes that the tanks are still. The tankers are still throwing in the sea. So what this is one of the direct impacts that we can see.
Yes, Iman.
ايوه انا احب الحقيقه يعني الحقيقه انا كنت عملت حلقه في الراديو مع نقيب الفلاحين الزراعيين في مصر، وكان وقتها بنتكلم عن مشكله حصلت بسبب التغيرات المناخيه. المحاصيل الزراعيه الخاصه تحت المانجو، يعني المحصول الزراعي للمانجا اتأثر في مصر بسبب التغيرات المناخية وخسائر كبيرة للزراعيين، وبعض منهم تقريبا هيفكر مجددا إن كان هيكرر التجربة في زراعة محصول المانجو أو غيره. غير الخسائر طبعا الاقتصادية اللي حققها.
Sorry, I'm not getting any translation, so I'm not sure if.
You haven't. Please check the channels because there is sometimes translation. You have to point on. You have to point on the English translation.
Yes, I am on the English channel and I used to get translation, but just on the last speaker for some reason.
دلوقتي
there was no translation.
دلوقتي أنا سامعة.
طيب هل حد أيوة يا إيمان. طب عيدي اللي قلتيه يا إيمان بعد إذنك عشان الترانسليشن عشان الترجمة.
تمام. دلوقتي أنا بتكلم إني كنت بستضيف عندي نقيب الفلاحين.
My question that I hosted the head of the syndicate of Egyptian farmers. One of the important points in our conversation that the impact of climate change on the mango yield this year, and a high percentage of farmers lost the crop because of the climate change. So we lost a lot of mango yield because of the climate change. It seems that it is so that this crop is so sensitive. Of course, this caused the economic losses, whether for the farmers and also the people who buy mango. So they are thinking now thoroughly about withdrawing or quitting mango planting. So this is a direct impact of climate change. Thank you, Iman.
Yes, thank you. I think that's an interesting example. So you see here how, I mean, you know, here specifically, I guess was climate change, which is requires an even, you know, wider set of responses. But yes, it may be that in terms of adaptation, it may be required to switch crops or have a different approach. I think maybe what I wanted to add actually was one addition to the previous question. I think one area, and I don't know if this is the case in Egypt, but we've seen in many other countries, that for instance, when nature or ecosystems deteriorate, for one of the implications for farmers is that they need to buy more fertilizer and spend more money on fertilizer because the kind of fertility from nature reduces, because nature, the soil the natural soils, the fertility goes down because the ecosystem is impacted. And so that has to be compensated by ever increasing more and more the amount of artificial or synthetic fertilizers that farmers need to use, which in turn increases the costs for those farmers and so reduces their income. So this is another example of in another sector where where this impact between biodiversity and ecosystems and jobs and income is becoming more clear. Maybe we can take the next question. I see Russia is muted, but maybe Salah, Iban.
صوتي مسموع كده. هو يعني ليو سونغ هو ضرب مثال كان شاهد.
You have gave us an example that you witnessed by yourself. You were talking about a group of people who were impacted directly because the area that they are living in, they were fishermen and they were suffering from the lack of fish. So this might be an indirect intervention of what the people do. That's why there is scarcity in fish. So overfishing sometimes takes place in certain areas and because of the human intervention. So what can ILO do to prevent such overfishing? Of course, this impacts the job opportunities for fishermen. I hope that my question is clear.
No, thank you. I mean, as you know, as ILO directly, I mean, some of these things are more difficult to directly for the ILO to intervene in such a local issue. But I think one of the principles from the ILO, one of the issues that I maybe didn't mention when I was introducing it, is that we are a tripartite organization. But in essence, one of our core values is what we call social dialogue. And that's, in the traditional sense, social dialogue is really that government, the employers, and the workers enter into this dialogue and are able to discuss common problems and find a solution by looking at it from each of the three perspectives. I think one of the weaknesses of, one of the challenges with ecosystems is that, the voice of nature is not at their table. So ideally, because there's who represents nature, who represents, in this case, the kind of the fish in this example. But of course, the fishermen to some extent do. And so I think one of the problems of overfishing is actually, it's a governance problem as much as a income problem or a nature problem, in the sense that, if there's no governing structure or rules that say, okay, everybody can fish so much, or this is the amount of fish this area can produce, then there's every incentives for everybody to fish as much as possible, and then the fish run out. So really so there's two elements here. One is, what are the rules around fishing, and can there be a set of rules that everybody collectively can agree to prevent overfishing? But the other part, and this links back maybe earlier to my other point, is that in a lot of areas, part of the problem is also that the areas, especially the breeding grounds for fish, which are also often close to the coast, where the fish lay their eggs and fish grow up in estuaries, that these breeding grounds have been destroyed or polluted. And so that, these areas, the amount of fish that live there are just also less because of these problems. And so another important part of that is protecting these breeding grounds, creating zones where nobody's allowed to fish, so that the fish can actually, grow there and raise, and then have rules around fishing. So these are just some of the kind of approaches that we would advocate to deal with some of these issues. Thank you.
I think there was a question at the chat. From the chat, I will say it in Arabic, read it in Arabic, and you will get the translation. ما هي الفئات الأكثر عرضة
What are the most vulnerable categories who are subject to climate change? I think they are women, children, and youth. So what are the most vulnerable categories for climate change?
Yeah, I think so. Here, I mean, if you look at it from the target group, if you would think about it from sector side, then it's those same sectors that I mentioned, agriculture, and we heard example from mango already earlier today. But agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and tourism are also from workers in those sectors are generally also quite vulnerable to the effects of climate change and of loss of ecosystems and destruction of ecosystems, because this dependence is so strong between these sectors and nature. So it's and of course, so if you combine those two, then it's, you know, women in agriculture probably are most vulnerable. Yeah, I hope that helps. I think there's one more hand, and I thought there was a hand also from Dina.
Yes, Muhammad Ashraf. Yes, it's Muhammad Ashraf. Dina Maraghi and Muhammad Ashraf. Dina. Muhammad Ashraf.
Dina, please. Dina, please, you can speak.
مساء الخير.
Good afternoon, Ms. Dina Saaz.
حضرتك كنت اتكلمت.
Sir, you had been speaking about the different relationships between ecosystems and the nature, and that the nature restoration can cause creation of jobs. So what about developing countries that are lacking job opportunities because they are taking into account preserving ecosystems? How can we convince them of this, making them, you can work on the standards, protecting the environment while having jobs, because people are overwhelmed by their need to eat and have medicine and things like that, the basics of life. So how can we let them know that the conservation of nature can also be creating jobs and creating such other benefits that they are seeking to have? Over.
Yes, thank you. That's yeah, it's a very good question. So I think, I mean, my message really, what I try to convey is that this is to help people understand this relationship between the two. And I think for a very long time, there's been in many people's mind this trade-off that you have to kind of, in order to create jobs, you have to destroy nature. You know, you have to, you know, to create a mine, you have to, you know, dig a hole and destroy what's there. To do agriculture, you have to cut down the forest and use the land to do agriculture. So this for a long time, I think the mindset of many people has been that it's one or the other. And I think we've reached a point now where actually, and this is becoming more clear, that there is actually, it's not one or the other, but actually find this balance between the two. And I mean, an interesting example of this actually, which I think you could, if you just Google it quickly, you'll find, we had a session with them last week, is this program in Pakistan called the 10 billion tree tsunami, where in Pakistan, they have embarked on a huge program to replant trees and restore ecosystems in many parts of the country, employing people to do so, but at the same time also because there's this realization that so much of the economy actually will do better if these systems are functioning better. So I think, yeah, I think there is ongoing process of trying to shift everybody from this kind of either or thinking to create a frame of mind, a framework for thinking that actually we have this mutual dependence between the two. And if that's, I think, becomes clearer, I think the argument to invest in nature will become stronger. And if countries like Pakistan can, that realization can be there, then I think can probably be in many other countries as well. And hopefully also in Egypt, this can be strengthened. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mikael. I think we have a last question from Salah. Salah, please ask your question. Salah, go ahead, ask your question.
استاذ ليو حضرتك اتكلمت عن ان منظمه العمل الدوليه
Mr. Song, you had been saying that ILO is providing some compensation to people who had been impacted in some areas. So how they are compensated? Is there a transparency in such compensations? Because for sure, some people who are impacted are really difficult to identify. It's in many cases, you cannot identify who is impacted versus who is not really impacted. So what kind of transparency you are having in this? Or what the criteria for judgment?
So yes, thank you for that question. I think maybe to clarify that we are not, maybe it's a misunderstanding, but we are not, as ILO, providing compensation to people on this. I think that's not as ILO, not only ILO. Typically, this would be.
Sorry, sir, your voice suddenly it went off. I don't know why. So would you kindly?
Okay, I'll try and speak up a little bit.
Sir. Yeah,
okay, thank you. Yeah, I just want to clarify that we don't, as ILO, we do not provide compensation to people who have lost income due to climate or to other. This would typically be something that is done by national governments, not by us as an organization. But of course, we would help or support such schemes if they are if countries are thinking of doing those or are planning those. I mean, in many cases we see such compensations may be bigger because it's also hard to, as you say, value exactly what are the losses that people should be compensated for. It's often very difficult to put a number on that. But one of the mechanisms for this is to use social protection, social security systems in countries. These systems are designed from our side for people who have lost their jobs or who have lost income. And then social security is meant to help those groups. So I think we would see those people actually being able to fall back on what we call these social safety nets or social security system, either to cash transfers or unemployment benefits or whatever may be the appropriate mechanism in the respective country. And that would be a mechanism to deal with on a transparent and equitable basis with people who have lost income or jobs through some of the damages. I think my time is up now, Rasha, but
أنا عندي سؤال لو في
Thank you so much.
Ahmed is saying if you have time for another question, sir.
Yeah, I could take one more question if possible. Yeah, but then I really.
بسرعة يا أحمد عشان هو وقته.
مساء الخير.
Good afternoon, Mr. Song. You had mentioned the impacts of the destruction of ecosystem and biodiversity on jobs and job creation. So my question is, the green jobs, can you talk to us more or just illustrate what are green jobs? Are you supporting, I mean by you, ILO supporting green jobs in some countries? Are you, how you are doing this? Is it voluntary? I mean, for people in green jobs, are they working for this paid or just volunteer? So I don't know, green jobs, are they paid jobs or just volunteering jobs or what? Over, sir.
Right, great questions. And I think I didn't speak too much about it. But so green jobs is a broad term that we use. They're really jobs. I mean, essential feature of green jobs from the ILO perspective is that they are jobs that help to recover or protect or restore the environment. That, you know, jobs that have positive impacts on the environment, and they come in a whole range.
يا حبيب لا يشوف ترى.
On the one hand, they can be paid jobs. An example may be a classic example of what we call green jobs as ILO are people who perhaps work in companies that install renewable energy like windmills or solar panels or that are, you know, these are energy systems that are more environmental friendly, and those are paid jobs, and they're normal companies that work in there. But it can be a whole, all the way on the other side, where yes, I mean, in some countries we have people who actually volunteering to work on nature. Partially, maybe they're volunteering because they can afford to. They have another job and they do this on a Sunday or something, or a free day. But in other cases, people do it because they think it's interesting and important, but there is actually no mechanism to pay them. Which brings me to the second part of what at least from the ILO side, is that we say that green jobs should have this environmental dimension, but they should also be decent jobs. So they are jobs that pay, you know, decent salary, and there are respectable conditions of work. People have minimum rights when they work. So for us, those are the two dimensions of what we call green jobs. But yes, I think they come in a very wide range. So you can have jobs, green jobs in ecosystem restoration. We would argue that they should be paid. But yes, that would be they would come from the government, because here it's the government that has an interest here, because the way things work in many countries now, it's the government that's really the custodian of nature as a whole, or the environment in that country. So they are the only ones who really would be interested or have ability to pay for this work. But of course, there are many other sectors, like in the energy sector, in construction sector, you know, making buildings that are more energy efficient, or isolating buildings. In the case of Egypt, I guess isolation, so that if you have air conditioning and all the cool air escapes and stuff like that, those are also green jobs in our view. But those are very commercial focused, and they would be normal jobs with people at a salary. So it's important to think of green jobs as a whole spectrum of jobs, and they can be varied in many sectors of the economy, and can be on many levels of income and skill level, etc. But I think the defining element is that they are jobs that actually help improve or contribute to improving the environment.
Thank you so much, Mikkel. We are running out of time. Thank you for this
I'm also running
presentation.
out. So.
Thank you so much, and wish you a nice evening. Thank you so much. Thank you, participants, and thank you for the opportunity
very
much. Thank you so much. Thank you, and hope to see you in another workshop, inshallah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the interpret.